Everyone feared the fierce cat, until an elderly woman uncovered the truth. Cat's letter. My first memories aren't of being held in warm arms, but of the bitter cold cutting through my tiny body as I huddled under a trash can behind an empty supermarket while the city slept. My stomach was always growling, and my breathing came in short, painful gasps. People say cats are made of mystery, but no one ever mentions that behind eyes that shine in the dark, there's also fear, loneliness, and a tiny hope of being seen for who we really are. I was just 3 months old when they brought me to the shelter. I still had the dust of alleyways on my paws and the hunger of nameless days showing through my ribs. They labeled me as fierce during my first week there, when I accidentally scratched the hand of a volunteer who moved too quickly near me. That one, nobody wants him. Just a skittish cat, look at those eyes. One of the shelter workers mumbled with a mix of pity and resignation. I didn't understand what I had done wrong. I was just scared. The cage they kept me in was small but clean. I spent my days watching other cats leave with smiling families. For me, there were only quick glances, withdrawn fingers, and almost always the same sentence: fierce. I learned to stay at the back of my cage to make myself invisible. Sometimes at night, when the shelter was quiet except for distant dog barks, I'd remember the warmth of my mother's fur before we were separated, the only comfort I had ever known. It was on a Tuesday in October when Evelyn first came to the shelter. She didn't approach my cage right away like others did. She moved slowly, carefully, as if she had all the time in the world. Her grey hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and deep lines around her eyes told stories of both laughter and tears. I noticed her hands first. They trembled slightly as she signed some papers at the front desk. I didn't know then that those hands would become my greatest comfort. "Which ones have been here the longest?" I heard her ask in a soft voice. The shelter worker pointed toward my corner, where the difficult cases stayed. "That orange tabby has been here for 8 months. No one wants him. Too fierce." I watched as Evelyn's eyes found mine, and for the first time in my life, someone didn't look away. "Dear friend, I never thought I would write a letter. Cats don't usually do such things, but Evelyn always said I had an old soul trapped in a furry body. I'm writing this letter from my favorite spot on the windowsill, where the afternoon sun creates a perfect warm patch for napping. From here, I can see the bird feeder Evelyn hung in the maple tree and the garden she tended with such care. I want to tell you my story, not because it's special, but because Evelyn thought it was worth knowing. My name is Ambrose, though for the first year of my life, I had no name at all. Just that orange cat or the fierce one. I guess that's why names became so important to me later. A name means you belong to someone, that you matter enough to be called something unique. Evelyn didn't take me home that first day. She came back the next day and the day after that. On her 4th visit, she brought a book and a small folding chair. She set up the chair next to my cage, opened her book, and began to read aloud in a low, soothing voice. She read for an hour while I watched from the back corner of my cage. When she left, she placed her bookmark, a pressed lavender stem, on top of my cage and said, "See you tomorrow, Ambrose." Ambrose. Just like that, I had a name. For 2 weeks, Evelyn came every afternoon. She never tried to touch me or coax me forward. She just read her stories, something about a man named Hemingway and his cats, and occasionally glanced at me with kind eyes. By the 3rd week, I had moved to the front of my cage. I could smell lavender on her cardigan, a scent that would always remind me of safety. The day she took me home, it was raining. She carried me in a carrier, lined with a soft blue blanket that smelled like her house. I was terrified, my heart racing so fast I thought it might burst. But Evelyn hummed softly during the entire car ride, the same tune she would later use to calm me during thunderstorms. "I know you're scared," she said as we pulled into the driveway of a small white house with blue shutters. "That's okay. Being scared means you've survived something. We have that in common, you and I." Her house was quiet in a way the shelter never was. No barking dogs, no slamming cage doors, no squeaking wheels of food carts, just the gentle ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway and occasional creaks of an old house settling. She set my carrier down in the living room and opened the door without trying to pull me out. "This is your home now, Ambrose. Take all the time you need." I stayed in that carrier for 6 hours before hunger finally drove me out. I found 2 bowls waiting for me in the kitchen, one with fresh water and one with food that smelled better than anything I'd had before. Nearby, Evelyn sat in a rocking chair, pretending to read, but watching me from the corner of her eye. That first night I hid under her bed, listening to her breathing as she slept. By morning I had inched closer to her side of the bed, drawn by her warmth and the steady rhythm of her heart. When she woke and saw me, she didn't grab or exclaim. She simply said, "Good morning, Ambrose," in the same gentle voice she had used at the shelter. It took me 3 weeks to let her pet me, another month before I would sit on her lap. But Evelyn never rushed me. She seemed to understand that trust isn't given. It's earned in 1,000 small moments of patience. One night, as rain tapped against the windows and we sat together by the fireplace, I heard her tell someone on the phone, "No, I won't be joining you this weekend. Ambrose needs consistency right now." After she hung up, she looked at me and said, "Some people don't understand that healing takes time." I didn't know then that Evelyn was healing too. And my favorite memories with Evelyn are the simple ones. The way she would save the last bit of milk from her cereal bowl for me each morning. How she would leave the bathroom faucet dripping just a little because she noticed I liked drinking from it. The radio that played old jazz music while she cooked dinner, and how she would hum along, occasionally singing a line or two in a soft, wavering voice. Evelyn had a routine that became mine too. She woke at 6:30 every morning, made coffee in an old percolator that filled the kitchen with rich aromas, and sat at the kitchen table to work on crossword puzzles. I would jump onto the empty chair across from her, keeping her company in comfortable silence. She called me her breakfast buddy, and sometimes told me about the clues she was struggling with, as if I might know the answers. 7 letters, feeling of nostalgia, she would say, tapping her pencil against the table. "What do you think, Ambrose? Longing, yearning?" I would blink slowly at her, which she always took as agreement. At exactly 10 a.m. she would water her houseplants, talking to each one as if they could hear her. "Looking thirsty today, aren't you?" Or, "My goodness, you've grown since yesterday." When she was done, she would wash her hands and then give me a fresh treat, usually a small piece of chicken or tuna. This was my favorite part of our morning routine. The afternoons were for reading. Evelyn had bookshelves that covered entire walls, filled with paperbacks and hardcovers of every size. She would choose a book and settle into her armchair by the bay window, where the light was best. I had my own spot on the wide windowsill, where I could alternate between watching the birds outside and watching Evelyn. Sometimes she would read passages aloud to me, especially if they made her laugh or if she found them particularly beautiful. "Listen to this, Ambrose," she would say. "We are all a little broken, but the last time I checked, broken crayons still color the same." She would look at me thoughtfully. "What do you think of that?" It wasn't until later that I understood she was healing from her own kind of brokenness. Photographs around the house told stories of a fuller life. Evelyn young and smiling beside a tall man with kind eyes, 2 children at various ages, family gatherings around holiday tables. But in our house it was just the 2 of us. Sometimes she would receive phone calls that made her voice brighten, but they always ended the same way, with Evelyn sitting quietly afterward, looking at old photos or staring out the window. I learned that the man in the photos was Thomas, her husband of 42 years who had died 3 years before she found me. The children, now grown with families of their own, lived far away. Michael in Seattle and Elizabeth in Phoenix. They called regularly but visited rarely. Evelyn never complained about this, but on days after their phone calls she would hold me a little longer than usual. "It's just us against the world, kiddo," she would whisper into my fur. Our evenings had their own rhythm. Evelyn would cook simple meals, chicken with vegetables, soup with crusty bread, or sometimes just cheese and crackers with sliced apples. She always shared little bits with me, placing them on a special small plate she kept just for my dinner portions, as she called them. After dinner, we would move to the living room. Evelyn would knit or do jigsaw puzzles while watching old movies on television. I would curl up beside her, purring as she absently stroked my head. On colder nights, she would drape a soft afghan over both of us, creating a cocoon of warmth. "You know, Ambrose," she said one winter evening as snow fell outside, "before you came I used to dread these long nights. Now I look forward to them." It was during one of these quiet evenings that I first climbed onto her chest and pressed my forehead against her chin, a gesture of trust and affection that made her eyes well up with tears. "Oh, my sweet boy," she whispered, her voice catching. "And they called you fierce." The first time Evelyn got sick, I knew something was wrong before she did. There was a change in her scent, subtle but unmistakable. She moved more slowly in the mornings, leaving her crossword puzzles half finished. The percolator went unused for 3 days straight. On the fourth morning, when she couldn't get out of bed, I paced anxiously around the room, meowing louder than I ever had before. Finally, she reached for the phone on her nightstand and called someone named Dr. Patterson. Later that day, her friend Marge from the garden club came to drive her to the doctor. When Evelyn returned, she had little orange bottles of pills and instructions to rest. For 2 weeks, our routine changed. I brought my bird watching indoors, never straying far from her bedroom. I slept curled against her side, monitoring her breathing throughout the night. "My little nurse," she would say with a weak smile, her hand finding my ear for a gentle scratch even when she seemed too tired to move much else. As she recovered, Evelyn told me the doctor called it pneumonia. "Nothing to worry about," she assured me, though I noticed she tired more easily afterward and sometimes needed to catch her breath after climbing the stairs. It was during her recovery that Evelyn started taking photographs of me. "For the days when I'm not feeling well," she explained, positioning her old camera to catch me in a sunbeam or playing with my catnip mouse. These photos joined the family pictures on the mantel, me alongside Thomas and the children, as if I had always been part of the family story. One day, as spring turned to summer, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with envelopes and stamps. "I'm sending your pictures to Michael and Elizabeth," she told me. "They should know who's keeping their mother company." A week later, a package arrived from Seattle. Inside was a soft cat bed with my name embroidered on the side, Ambrose. I sniffed it suspiciously while Evelyn laughed. "See, they like you already," she said, placing the bed near her favorite chair. Though I preferred her lap to any cat bed, I recognized the gesture for what it was. Acceptance into a family I had never met. That summer was full of small pleasures. Evelyn moved her reading spot to the back porch, where I could explore the fenced garden under her watchful eye. She planted catnip in a sunny corner, which she called Ambrose's section of the garden. She installed a bird feeder that attracted finches and chickadees, providing me with hours of entertainment. In the evenings, when the air cooled and fireflies appeared in the yard, Evelyn would sit on the porch swing, patting the spot beside her until I jumped up. Together, we would rock gently as darkness fell, listening to the crickets and distant train whistles. "I never thought I could feel this peaceful again," she confessed one night, her fingers tracing the stripe pattern on my back. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over, but here we are." I pressed closer to her side, trying to tell her in my own way that I understood loneliness and the miracle of finding home. "Shasi wandastu." I don't know when I first noticed that Evelyn was changing. Perhaps it was the day she forgot to fill my water bowl, something that had never happened in our 4 years together. Or maybe it was when she called me Thomas one morning, then looked startled and confused before correcting herself. The changes came slowly at first. Missed routines, repeated stories, the occasional moment of frustration when she couldn't find her reading glasses, which were often perched on top of her head. I adapted as cats do, reminding her with persistent meows when it was mealtime, leading her to the cabinet where treats were kept, staying even closer to her side. The woman named Elizabeth came to visit that fall. I had never seen her in person before, only heard her voice through the phone. She looked like a younger version of Evelyn, with the same kind eyes but fewer lines around them. She watched her mother carefully, frowning when Evelyn put the milk in the cabinet instead of the refrigerator, making notes when Evelyn struggled to remember her neighbor's name. After Evelyn went to bed early one evening, Elizabeth sat on the couch, her eyes red from crying. I approached cautiously, unsure of this stranger in our home. To my surprise, she gently picked me up and set me on her lap. "So you're Ambrose," she said softly, running her hand along my back. "Mom talks about you all the time. Says you saved her life." She scratched under my chin just the way I liked, as if Evelyn had taught her how. "I need you to keep watching over her, okay? At least until we figure things out." The next morning, Elizabeth made phone calls from the kitchen while Evelyn and I sat on the porch. I could hear words like assessment and early stages and options. After she left, 3 days later, different people started coming to the house. A woman named Nurse Janet, who checked Evelyn's blood pressure, a younger woman named Carla, who helped with cleaning, and a man named Doctor Wilson, who asked Evelyn questions that sometimes made her frustrated or sad. "I'm not a child," I heard her tell Dr. Wilson one day. I just get confused sometimes. After these visits, Evelyn would often sit with me on her lap, stroking my fur, while tears slid silently down her cheeks. I would purr loudly, trying to remind her that whatever was happening, she wasn't alone. Our routines simplified. The crossword puzzles disappeared, replaced by simpler word searches. The complex recipes Evelyn once cooked became basic meals prepared by Carla and left in containers marked with the days of the week. The jazz radio station gave way to a television channel that played old black and white movies all day. But some things remained constant. Evelyn still saved the last sip of milk from her cereal for me. She still talked to her plants every morning, even if she sometimes called them by the wrong names. And each night we still sat together in her armchair, her fingers finding the spot behind my ears that made my purr rumble like distant thunder. It was during one of these evenings that Evelyn held my face between her hands and looked directly into my eyes. "Ambrose," she said with unusual clarity, "I'm not going to get better. You know that, don't you?" I blinked slowly at her, the way cats do when they're saying "I love you." "Elizabeth wants me to move to a place where people can help me all the time," she continued, her voice wavering. "A place where they probably don't allow cats." My ears flattened against my head as her words sank in. I'd heard the phone conversations, seen the brochures on the kitchen table with pictures of smiling older people in bright common rooms, but hadn't understood what they meant until that moment. "I told her I won't go anywhere without you," Evelyn said firmly, dropping a kiss on top of my head. "We're a package deal, you and I." For a while it seemed Evelyn had won the argument. Elizabeth and Michael arranged for more help at home. Carla came every day now, and Nurse Janet visited 3 times a week. Dr. Wilson gave Evelyn new pills that seemed to help with her confusion. We settled into a new normal. But then winter came, bringing with it a terrible night when Evelyn got up to use the bathroom and fell in the darkened hallway. I found her there, crumpled on the floor, her hip twisted at a strange angle. I meowed frantically, running between her and the phone on her bedside table, wishing I had hands to dial for help. It was hours before Carla arrived for her morning shift and found us, Evelyn pale and in pain, me standing guard over her, refusing to leave her side even as the paramedics arrived. After the hospital, everything changed quickly. Evelyn returned home with a walker, and more pain than I had ever sensed in her before. Michael flew in from Seattle and stayed in the guest room. There were hushed conversations, more brochures, and finally tears as decisions were made. "It's called Willow Creek," Michael explained to his mother as they sat at the kitchen table. I was perched on Evelyn's lap, her hand resting protectively on my back. "It's a really nice place, Mom. They have gardens like you love and a library and—" He hesitated, glancing at me before continuing. "They have a pet-friendly policy." Evelyn's hand tightened slightly in my fur. "Ambrose can come." "Well," Michael looked uncomfortable. "They allow pets to visit, but residents can't keep them full-time unless it's a certified therapy animal." "Then get him certified," Evelyn said with surprising firmness. "I'm not going without my cat." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, doctor's visits, and people coming to assess both Evelyn and me. A woman with a clipboard watched how I interacted with Evelyn, noting my gentle behavior and calm demeanor. "He's naturally therapeutic," she commented, seeming surprised. "Most shelter cats with his background wouldn't be this well adjusted." "We healed each other," Evelyn told her simply. Whatever hurdles needed to be cleared, Elizabeth and Michael managed them. By spring, we were moving to Willow Creek. Our house, the only true home I had ever known, was packed up box by box. I hid under the bed as familiar furniture disappeared, emerging only when Evelyn called for me. "It's still us against the world," she assured me as she sat on the bare mattress, the last piece of furniture left in the bedroom. Just a different part of the world. Our new home was smaller, just 2 rooms with a tiny kitchenette and bathroom. The smells were strange, disinfectant and unfamiliar food and medications, but Evelyn's familiar scent remained, along with her blue Afghan, her favorite armchair, and the photographs of Thomas, Michael, Elizabeth, and me. I wore a special vest now that identified me as a therapy companion. It felt strange at first, but I understood it was the price of staying with Evelyn. The staff quickly grew fond of me, especially a kind aide named Rosa, who always greeted me by name and sometimes brought me little treats. "That cat watches over Mrs. Harrington like a guardian angel," I heard Rosa tell another aide. Our days at Willow Creek developed their own rhythm. Evelyn attended morning activities in the common room, while I watched from her wheelchair. We took slow walks in the garden when the weather was nice, Evelyn pushing her walker while I walked alongside, occasionally batting at fallen leaves. In the afternoons, we napped together in her room, the sunlight creating familiar patterns on the new walls. Some days were better than others. On good days, Evelyn would tell the other residents stories about how we found each other, embellishing my bravery and intelligence until I hardly recognized myself in her tales. On harder days, when confusion clouded her eyes, I would press against her side and purr until she remembered where she was. "My fierce one," she would murmur, finding comfort in my presence even when other memories failed her. So the hardest part of loving Evelyn was watching her slowly slip away. It happened in pieces. First the names of her houseplants, then the words to her favorite songs, then the titles of beloved books. Sometimes she would look at Michael's picture and call him Thomas. Sometimes she would look at me with momentary confusion before recognition dawned. But through it all, her hands never forgot how to stroke my fur. Her voice never lost the special tone she used when talking to me, and somehow, even on her most clouded days, she remembered my name. "Ambrose," she would say with certainty when I jumped onto her bed. "My good boy." As time passed, Evelyn spent more days in her room than out of it. Rosa and the other aides brought activities to her, simple puzzles, picture books, music players with headphones. I rarely left her side now, sensing that my presence kept her tethered to herself somehow. Elizabeth and Michael visited more often. They would sit beside Evelyn's bed, holding her hand and telling her news of grandchildren and jobs and vacations. Sometimes Evelyn followed their stories with bright interest. Other times her gaze would drift to the window, lost in thoughts none of us could reach. During these visits, I noticed how Elizabeth and Michael had begun to look at me differently, with concern and something like guilt. One afternoon, as Evelyn napped, Elizabeth sat on the floor beside my cat bed. "You've been exactly what she needed," she said quietly, running her finger along my paw, "but I worry about what will happen to you after." I didn't need human words to understand what she meant. I had seen other residents at Willow Creek decline and then disappear. I had smelled the approaching end in Evelyn's changing scent, sensed it in the growing fragility of her bones beneath my paws when I carefully walked across her lap. That winter, our third at Willow Creek, Evelyn began to refuse food. The aides tried everything: favorite dishes from the past, soft foods easier to swallow, nutritional supplements in flavors meant to tempt. I would sit beside her plate, hoping my interest might spark hers, but her appetite continued to fade. Dr. Wilson visited more frequently, his conversations with Michael and Elizabeth increasingly somber. Words like comfort care and time frames hung in the air like heavy mist. A new machine appeared beside Evelyn's bed, monitoring numbers that seemed to mean a great deal to the nurses who checked them. Through it all, I maintained my post. When Evelyn was awake, I stayed where she could see me, offering comfort with my presence. When she slept, I curled beside her pillow, my purr a constant reminder that she wasn't alone. The staff began leaving food and water for me in Evelyn's room, so I wouldn't have to leave her to meet my own needs. "I've never seen anything like it," Rosa told a new aide. "That cat senses what she needs before we do." One unusually warm day in February, sunlight streamed through Evelyn's window with surprising brightness. Rosa had positioned Evelyn's chair to catch the light, and for the first time in weeks, Evelyn seemed fully present, her eyes clear as they followed a cardinal hopping on the branch outside. "Ambrose," she called softly, patting her lap. I jumped up carefully, arranging myself to avoid the places where I knew she felt pain. Her hand trembled as she stroked from my head to tail, but her touch was as tender as ever. "My fierce one," she whispered. "I'm sorry I have to leave you." I pressed my head against her chest, listening to the familiar but increasingly uneven rhythm of her heart. We sat like that for a long time, the sun moving slowly across the floor, neither of us needing more than this quiet communion. That night, as stars appeared outside the window, Evelyn's breathing changed in a way that made me alert. I moved from my spot at the foot of the bed to lie beside her pillow, my body pressed against her silver hair. Her eyes opened briefly, finding mine in the dim light. "Good boy," she murmured, the words barely audible. "Such a good boy." I began to purr, loud and steady, giving her this one last gift as her breathing slowed. I stayed there as her chest rose and fell with decreasing frequency, as the night nurse came and went with quiet efficiency, as the monitors beeped their warnings and then fell silent at human hands. I was still there when dawn broke, its pale light finding Evelyn's face, peaceful now, pain-free at last. I remained at her side until Rosa came with tears on her cheeks and gentle hands to lift me. "She's gone, sweet boy," Rosa whispered against my fur. "You did so well, you stayed right to the end." And the days after Evelyn left were a blur of strange places and unfamiliar hands. Elizabeth took me to her hotel room, where I hid under the bed, emerging only for water and necessary visits to the litter box. There were phone calls and arrangements, conversations where my name was mentioned with concern and uncertainty. "I can't take him to Phoenix, my husband's allergic," Elizabeth explained to someone. "My apartment doesn't allow pets," Michael's voice replied from the speakerphone. "We could see if anyone at Willow Creek would adopt him," Elizabeth suggested, but her tone lacked conviction. I understood then that I might be returning to where my story began. A cage, watching others walk past, labeled once again as unwanted. But on the third day, as Elizabeth packed her suitcase, there was a knock at the hotel room door. A young woman with Evelyn's eyes and Elizabeth's smile entered cautiously. "Grandma's cat?" she asked, glancing around the room until she spotted me beneath the desk chair. "Yes, that's Ambrose," Elizabeth sighed. "I was just telling your uncle that we might need to take him to the shelter." The young woman, who I would later learn was Evelyn's granddaughter Rebecca, knelt down to my level, extending her hand palm up in a gesture of peace. "Is he still wearing his therapy companion vest?" she asked, not taking her eyes off me. "It's in that bag with his other things," Elizabeth pointed. "Why?" Rebecca smiled, a smile so like Evelyn's that my heart squeezed painfully in my chest. "Because I've been looking for exactly that kind of cat for my work at the children's hospital. If he's already certified and has a good temperament. And so instead of returning to a cage, I found myself in a new home, a small apartment with bright colors and a window seat overlooking a busy street. Rebecca worked long hours at a place that smelled of the same disinfectant as Willow Creek, but was filled with smaller humans whose scents carried both illness and resilience. 3 times a week, I accompanied Rebecca to this place, wearing my therapy vest with a new tag that read Ambrose Reading Buddy. Children who were scared or in pain would brighten when Rebecca carried me into their rooms. Small hands, sometimes attached to tubes or wires, would reach for my fur with gentle wonder. "This is Ambrose," Rebecca would tell them. "He loves when kids read to him. He especially likes stories about adventures and brave heroes." And so I would listen, as uncertain voices sounded out words from colorful books, gaining confidence with each page turned. I would purr against small chests to ease pain or fear. I would sit patiently as tiny fingers practiced motor skills by brushing my coat or securing a new bandana around my neck. "He used to be called Fierce," Rebecca sometimes told the children, "but that was just because people didn't understand him. Really, he's brave and gentle and very, very loving." I think Evelyn would have liked that, how her love continues to ripple outward through me, touching lives she never knew. In the evening, when Rebecca and I return home, I often sit in the window seat as the sun sets, watching the world below and thinking of Evelyn. Some might say cats don't remember, that we live only in the present moment. But I remember everything. The cold nights before the shelter, the cage where I waited, and most of all, the woman who saw past my fear to the heart beneath. I remember her patience, her gentle voice reading aloud on winter evenings, her fingers finding the perfect spot behind my ears, and her unwavering belief that I was more than the label fierce that others had given me. In the end, I think that's what love does. It sees beyond labels to the truth of who we are. Evelyn saw me not as fierce, but as brave, not as unwanted, but as worthy of patience, not as broken, but as perfectly myself. And so, dear friend, if you're reading this letter and wondering why a cat would have so much to say, know this. We are all more than the labels others give us. We all have stories worth telling, worth hearing. And sometimes, the greatest acts of love come from the most unexpected sources, even from a shelter cat once called Fierce, who found his true home in the heart of a lonely woman who needed him just as much as he needed her. I miss Evelyn every day. But when I purr against a child's chest and feel their fear subside, when I sit in Rebecca's lap as she cries after a hard day, when I comfort someone who feels alone in their pain, I know that Evelyn is still here, her love continuing through me. That's the thing about love. It doesn't end even when we have to say goodbye. It just changes form and finds new ways to heal the world. With whiskers and purrs, Ambrose, the cat they once called Fierce,